Good evening, everyone out there. I am Dr. Satish, Senior Pulmonologist working at Fortis and Vikram Hospital, Bangalore. I am also the patron and founder member of CCI, also the president of Karnataka Pulmonology Association. I am also the moderator for this evening webinar. I welcome all of you for this very interesting and very practical webinar on COVID management for family physicians, part 2. I am aware, and all of you are aware, that the family physicians are the backbone of our Indian healthcare system, be on diabetes, be on tuberculosis, and now on COVID management. They have been very active Corona warriors during this whole 1 year of COVID pandemic. I thank the organizers of this webinar, CCI, and our sponsor at JB Chemicals Limited for this webinar. There are two topics for today's webinar discussion. The first one is an important topic on vaccine. All that you have to know about the vaccine for COVID-19 infection. This is going to be delivered by Dr. Amit Bansal, who is a young, dynamic consultant, pulmonologist, and critical care medicine specialist at Jaipur, Fortis Hospital. The second topic is even more important, the role of ivermectin and anticoagulation in the management of COVID-19 infection. This is going to be delivered by Professor Radha Munje, who's from Nagpur, senior pulmonologist and head of the department at Respiratory Medicine, IGGMC Nagpur. She is also the president of Vidarbha Chest Association. She's a very senior pulmonologist and a very active member of CCI family. Now over to Dr. Ankit Bansal for the first talk on this webinar this evening on vaccines. Over to you, Dr. Ankit Bansal, followed by Dr. Radha Munje's talk on ivermectin and anticoagulation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Good evening, all. I am Dr. Ankit Bansal, Consultant Pulmonology and Critical Care, Fortis Hospitals, Jaipur. As an important discussion initiated by CCI on the various aspects of COVID-19 pandemic, one of the very key consideration is the discussion about COVID-19 vaccines. If we see a brief overview of COVID pandemic, there are high-level overview of emerging issues, which include distinct challenges. Any pandemic goes through various different stages. In stage first, there is an unknown emergence of a virus. In stage 2, the pandemic unfolds. In stage 3, the pandemic accelerates. Stage 4, there is multi-facet pandemic. Stage 5, the medical encounter or counter measures. So this is a very important prospect, stage 5, for the control of pandemic. So if you see stage first, when an unknown virus emerges, there is research for diagnostics, vaccines, and therapeutic that begins immediately. After the learning of West Africa Ebola outbreak in 2014 and 16, WHO adopted a plan of research and development, and this is known as the R&D blueprint. And this R&D blueprint is a global strategy to enable rapid activation of research during epidemic, fast-track development of diagnostic, vaccines, and medicines. And WHO convened the first global COVID-19 Research and Innovation Forum in Geneva on 11 to 12 February 2020. Now, if we see the history of this COVID-19 pandemic, it started all together from 31st December when the cluster of pneumonia were detected in Wuhan. On 1st January 2020, WHO activated the incident management team. 5th January, WHO issues the first disease outbreak news. 23rd January, the first IHR emergency committee meeting was initiated. Restrictions were imposed in Wuhan, including all the transports were suspended on 23rd January, and WHO declared the public health emergency on 30th January of international concern. Strategic preparedness and response plans were issued on 4th Feb, and finally on 11th March, WHO described this COVID-19 as a pandemic. Now, as we know, for the control of this pandemic, the stage 5 is very important when the medical encounter begins. As we know that the second wave cases has been rising in various parts of Europe, USA, and now in different parts of our country, that is India. The vaccine program has been rolled out. There is growing concern of emerging variants all across the globe. Now, in stage 5, there is COVID vaccine accelerated development. If we see as of now the figures of 2nd March 2021, there are around 76 COVID-19 candidate vaccines in clinical development, of which 12 are in phase 3 and 4 in phase 4 trial. Another 182 candidate vaccine in preclinical development. More than 90% of all top candidate vaccines will be delivered through intramuscular injections, and most are designed for a 2-dose schedule. So, as of 3rd March, there are 265 million vaccines dose has been administered. Different vaccines has been administered. It could be the manufacturing company could be of Pfizer, Moderna, Oxford, Gamaleya, Sinopharma, Sinovac, Bharat Biotech. So if we see the global distribution, yes, Israel is the country who has been very active in vaccinating her population. And as of 3rd March, around 52% of the population has been vaccinated. Now, the important concern that we are asking about that we have vaccines, but what type of vaccines that we are dealing in? So any immunity can be given in 2 forms. It could be an active immunity or in a passive immunity. So active immunity means you give vaccination. Passive immunity means you administer antibody. Now, the various component of virus, it could be its DNA, it could be its RNA, it could be the viral vector, it could be subunit. The vaccine could be live attenuated. So there are the various forms of the virus entity which has been developed, processed, and eventually developed into a vaccine. Some DNA vaccines like of Inivo, Moderna, Pfizer works on the principle of RNA vaccines. Oxford, AstraZeneca, there is a viral vector, including the Janssen 1. Novavax, Clover Biopharma work on viral subunits. Indian Immunologics, live attenuated vaccines. Sinovac and Sinopharma inactivated virus-like particle VPL. Split virus vaccines like flu vaccines, ribonucleoprotein vaccines like RNPs. So these are all active immunity vaccinations. Antibody, which include monoclonal antibody, which include ipilimumab, and polyclonal antibody, which will be Regeneron. Convalescent plasma, recently ICMR has restricted its use in the management of COVID patients. mRNA-induced antibody. So the various types in which this could be processed. And we will be briefly touching this part. Now the question arises, why there are so many vaccines in development? As we know that as the start of pandemic, according to WHO, as of November 12, 2020, there are 48 vaccines in clinical trial at that particular time, and 164 candidate vaccines in preclinical evaluation. So all these vaccines have one thing in common. They stimulate a primary immune response so that body can develop either memory B cells and T cells against the SARS-CoV-2 virus. And the development of this immune memory by vaccine, this will protect a particular individual to the subsequent infection. Each COVID-19 vaccine has distinct advantage and disadvantage, but the development of different COVID-19 vaccine provide some redundancy and some overlap. In some cases, if suppose a vaccine is not effective or it fails to protect, at least there are some other vaccines which are in the pipeline, they are in development, and they can at least can be uses for the humanity. So that's why multiple vaccines are being developed globally, so that more and more population is getting immunized sooner and the pandemic could be eliminated faster. Now, there is another question, that why most of the vaccines are 2 doses. How many times? Now, there are 2 types of immune response. One is the primary immune response. Once a person is exposed to SARS-CoV virus for the first time or get the first dose of vaccine, the primary immune response is slow and it is weak, and it takes days for the body to generate the enough antibodies and T cells to eliminate the virus. But body has a long-lasting B cell and T cell memory that remembers the SARS-CoV-2 virus, and this is known as immune memory. And when the virus enters the body for the second time or second dose of vaccine is given, they develop the second immune response. And the second immune response is stronger, quicker than the primary immune response, as we have already memory cells which are already rapidly activated. So we have high antibody concentration and T cell counts for the virus more quickly, reducing the symptom and severity of COVID-19. So it is the development. So this on this principle, the basically 2 vaccines developed. So as you could see the diagram, there's an initial infection, there's primary immune response, subsequent infection with the second dose, there is a secondary immune response, and you have immune memory. Now, this is the global picture, and you could see that nearly most of the countries, particularly the developed countries, are more into the vaccine development. Russia is also a keen country. India is also participating in many trials. We have few vaccines which has been approved by controller authorities. Now, we come over to the type of vaccines. Now, the central dogma that is applied to all vaccines is that we have a DNA vaccines, RNA vaccines, or protein vaccines. DNA is, as we know that how the central dogma of biology is that how DNA is converted into an RNA is converted into protein. So this particular thing has developed the various types of vaccines. There is ultimately a production of viral protein, which is delivered DNA or RNA directs out our cells to make more part of viral protein that does not cause disease. An immune system makes an antibodies, and same it would protect protein being injected directly. Now, rapid production of DNA or RNA in large amount only require the sequence of the virus genetic material. And this was published in various researches. Novel vaccines have been developed, which include the protein subunit vaccine and the split virus vaccine, and virus-like particle to mRNA. This make antibody directly. So we'll be briefly touching all this part. Now, first is the DNA vaccines. If we see the DNA vaccines, they are made up of small strands of DNA, a gene which encode the antigen of interest. In our case, it is a spike protein that we commonly see, that is the S protein of COVID-19 coronavirus. And this gene is attached to the carrier plasmid for delivery into the body. The plasmid is used to the body so that it does not degrade the foreign gene before it provokes the immune response. When administered, this DNA are taken by the host, which produce the spike protein and show the antigen on self-response that stimulate the antibody and T cell response. Inovio Pharma in developing DNA vaccines in this particular juncture. Now, the most talked about is the mRNA vaccines. Now, we know that mRNA, that is RNA vaccine, consists of an mRNA, that's a messenger RNA, which encode for the antigen of interest, again, the spike protein or the S protein. This is placed in lipid nanoparticle vehicle. The LNP prevents the mRNA degradation by the host until it is taken by the cell. Once administered, the RNA are taken by the host cell, and the intracellular lipase degrade this LNP, which exposed to mRNA. So this mRNA is finally translated into your S protein, and will stimulate the antibody and T cell response. Now, basically, two major talked about vaccines, that is the Moderna and the Pfizer, they are based on this particular principle. So both vaccine carry the foreign gene for which the whole has protein. So RNA and DNA vaccines, the DNA and RNA vaccines strike the balance between generating effective immune response and ease of production. They generate the strong cell-mediated and antibody immune responses. They are taken up by the cell will produce and show the protein on the cell surface to develop the adequate immune response. They are cheaper as to produce the genetic material to mass produce that. They are safer to administer both on the immunosuppressed or immunocompromised individual. There are certain challenges. Effectivity is still a matter, but still they are very important concern. They have been discussed in the past and studied a lot. Another group which include the vector vaccines which include similar to the live attenuated vaccines. They are harmless virus, attenuated virus known as vector, and these attenuated virus carry a foreign gene in their genome, as you can see, and this include the spike protein in SARS-CoV-2. Whenever this virus infects a cell, they administer this foreign gene to the cell. The cell then transcribes and translates the gene to produce the antigen and display the antigen to the cell surface for immune response. The infected cells slowly reproduce the virus, which allow more cells to become infected and display the antigen on the surface. The Oxford AstraZeneca, Gamaleya Sputnik, Janssen vaccines are all vector vaccines. Why this mechanism is important? Because in India, as you could see, that we are using the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine, which is name of Covishield, and Sputnik, which is also from Russia, that is also based on this principle of vector vaccine. So another important group which include the live attenuated vaccines. You contain a live vaccine, but it is less effective form of pathogens. They have all the original component, but they produce mutation. They have the ability to replicate inside the body, but they will not produce the natural infection. We have used this technology in the past, like to treat polio, tuberculosis, and chickenpox. 3 COVID vaccines have been there in the past, developed in September 2022. The trials have been initiated for that. The Indian immunological medium, that is the covaxins and all, that is Indian immunological mediums are developing live attenuated vaccines, which are also not in the clinical trials. So they are also into the work into that. So if you see, they have the single advantages, but similarly, the advantage is that you have a single dose of vaccine, which is sufficient to protect the person against COVID-19. This gives the long-lasting immunity due to mass proliferation of memory B and T cells. Live attenuated COVID-19 vaccines, once approved, can quickly produce a scale of existing methods and facilities as available to produce the live attenuated vaccines. But still, it has a disadvantage because of the biosafety facilities to safely produce the vaccine. Cold storage facilities are very much required. They cannot be given to the immunocompromised or immunosuppressed patient, and they can slowly replicate, exceed the immune system to contain the pathogen. There is a risk, then it can accumulate mutation, it can revert back to the infective form and can produce the infection. Many vaccines have been developed on this phase, but still there is always a pros and cons to every type of vaccines. Inactivated vaccines, they are considered safer because they cannot replicate inside the body. So there is no possibility of eliminating the possibility of infection. They are stored at room temperature as the pathogen is dead. So refrigeration needs is decreased. On the other hand, the inactive pathogens cannot replicate inside the body. So more than one dose is required at the same time to develop the immune memory. Biosafety levels are needed to firstly grow the pathogen and then inactivate on the scale. Inactivation of the pathogen may alter the shape of the antigen, which may be different from the original version. Hence, the body may not generate the correct immune response against the original SARS-CoV-2 vaccine. Viral subunit vaccine, they take part of pathogens that simulate an immune response and inject them into the body. Most subunit vaccine consists of protein from the pathogens such as SARS-CoV-2 protein, but they can also be fragments of bacterial toxins or pathogenic components such as soil wall. Two of the COVID vaccines have been developed on this principle, Novavax, and that is Clover Biopharma, SCB 2019. Both vaccines contain the whole S protein of SARS-CoV-2 combined with an adjuvant chemical that enhances the immune response of the vaccine. Subunit vaccines have strong antibody response and possess and present to B cell to stimulate antibody production. They are safer to administer as the whole pathogen is not injected, so it will not cause infection. They are simpler and cheaper to produce, and as only part of the vaccines have been used. Another is our virus-like particles vaccine. They mimic the virus, not infectious, not a danger, effective way of creating vaccines. We have used it before in human papilloma virus, hepatitis, and malaria. They are nanostructures that resemble the structure of virus, composed of more structural protein that can be arranged in several layers and contain a lipid outer envelope. They trigger both the humoral and cellular immune response. They lack a viral genomic material, so there is a safety both for manufacturing and administration. The advantage include bacterial, yeast, insect, and mammalian cell. So mRNA-induced antibody that we've heard about, another type of passive immunity. It has been explored for the antigen of interest like viral spike of protein. It enters the host cell, make multiple copies of the antibody, bypass several immune response steps, and make antibody directly. So risk and benefit similarly like of a passive immunity. Now, so we have talked about the various types of vaccines, their various mechanisms. Now, as we have seen, the DNA, nucleic acid, DNA, RNA viral vector, they need a special delivery system, particular DNA vaccines, RNA by syringe or needle. 2 doses are required for that. If you consider the virus or protein, live attenuated, inactivated or viral subunit, live attenuated generally 1 dose is required, viral subunit also 1 dose, inactivated you need 2 doses. So this is the summarized form. Most of the vaccines are given in intramuscular form, but some are intranasal, intradermal, subcutaneous, or even oral. So, if you see DNA vaccine, there is risk of integration mutation. There are medium spatial facilities required. RNA vaccine are considered safe. They have strong response, ease of production. Viral vector, again, there is risk of integration and mutation and easy to produce. If you see virus protein, live attenuated, again, there is risk of infection. There is a robust response. That is an important thing, but they are easy to produce. Inactivated viral subunit, they are safe, they are strong. Inactivated, you need spatial facilities. Viral subunit, they are easy to produce. Now, there are the various pipelines, vaccines that we have discovered already, which of the various we commonly learn in day-to-day routine. Pfizer, Moderna, Sputnik, AstraZeneca, Johnson & Johnson, Sinopharma, Sinovac, Bharat Biotech. So there are the various methods that they are, yes, efficacy of few of mRNA vaccine goes in the trials has shown up to 95% and leading to hospitalization or death on clinical trial, most are 100%. Now recent papers are coming up for the tune of Bharat Biotech that could be effective as 81%. So this is the summarization list. So if we consider the 3 important vaccines that right now our drug authorities have given approval, one is the Covishield, another is Covaxin, and recently given approval to what we call as the Sputnik. So if we consider then head conversion or the difference between Covishield and Covaxin. Covishield is a virus vector vaccine. It is a usually weakened, non-replicating strain of chimpanzee cold virus to carry genetic material of the spike protein of SARS-CoV-2 into human cell. Whereas Covaxin, it contains the inactivated SARS-CoV-2, which is disabled for replication. Proteins are intact, which are able to provoke immunity of the host. The other chemical ingredient in form of excipients, which are detailed out of the table below. So you could see the chemical ingredients of the Covishield, and this is of the Covaxin. Now, the mechanism, as we have already discussed, how they produce the mechanism of immunization. If we see Covishield, they produce antibody against a specific region of the virus. It contains the portion of DNA that codes for spike protein. So as we have seen that how this enter in the cells and how it produced the antibody response. Similarly, for the Covaxin, it produced antibody against many regions of the complete virus. This is a full inactivated virus with all the 929 protein intact. So it produces a natural immunity, natural immunity to that. So both vaccine needs a cold storage to 2 to 8 degrees Celsius for convenient storage and transport. AstraZeneca and Oxford University has participated along with the Serum Institute Pune for the development of Covishield. Covaxin has been developed by Hyderabad-based Bharat Biotech with the Indian Council of Medical Research and National Institute of Virology in Pune. So dosage, again, you have to take 2 doses regime. Recently, government of India has, after the review with the expert committee, has increased the interval of Covishield from 12 weeks to 16 weeks. And Covaxin 2 doses has to be taken 4 weeks apart. Now, Covishield, the average efficacy, it is up to tune of 70%. Covaxin, one data showed about the efficacy of 81%, still in the process. Not much major side effects as we normally do for a vaccine. So the myths should be removed. This is the important prospect. Now, as a treating clinician, what are the various things that are there? What should know whenever there is some inquiry about the vaccine? Because these type of questions, I search out the questionnaires and I formulate from one of the National Nursing Action Group about the various type of questionnaires that could be possible regarding COVID vaccine. So as a clinician, what are the important questions that we should know that needs to be addressed? First is your vaccine safe? Yes, should we trust health expert and government when the vaccine was developed so quickly? And how this COVID vaccine work? Is there could be new technology and could harm? What is an emergency use authorization? How soon second vaccine would be protected for how long? How I need to wear a mask? What is a possible short and long-term side effect? So now government has allowed to be vaccinated above the age of 18 years. What are the medical other contraindications? Due to side effect, I can miss my work due to I get COVID because of vaccine. So that is important. Are your COVID vaccines safe? Yes, currently, whatever the vaccines which are approved across in our country or across the world, they are considered safe. Most side effects occur within 6 weeks of getting the vaccine. But FDA has said that you need to have 8 weeks of safety monitoring. You need more than around 3,000 participants versus safety. So most of the studies have 30,000 to 50,000 of the participants. So the safety has been given a top priority by FDA and healthcare community. So the important thing now comes into mind. Do we trust the healthcare system about COVID vaccine safety? Yes, we should. So FDA has certain standard along with the various authorities which are placed in the various countries, like in European countries or Indian countries, they have some safety standard. So various part of the vaccine development part has been there, but no step is skipped. Every step has been taken care of while the development of vaccine. And the first important component that has been taken always is safety. Efficacy may be variant, but safety is never compromised. So we know we should be considered about the various technologies, mRNA technologies, or it could be that. Generally, we don't use live virus or killed virus particle. They help our body to build antibodies. mRNA technology is not new. It has been used before. There is a possibility it can give COVID? Less likely. It can change your DNA? No. So what is EUA and what does it meant for? Because we have been learning a lot about what is EUA. It is an emergency use authorization for a vaccine. It is based on the need to use a vaccine quickly to save life during a public health emergency. As you could know that COVID-19 is a pandemic and it's a public health emergency. It is a shorter process, but no steps are skipped in safety evaluation process. FDA will assess if the vaccine knows and potential benefit outweighs the known and potential risk. All the advisory board look into these recommendations. Another question arises, when and how long will I be protected by the COVID vaccine? Most of the vaccine, as we know, that 2 doses are given around at minimum period of 4 weeks apart. Protection mostly begins after 1 to 2 weeks. We don't know how long it will protect us. So research are again needed. We need to have maybe a vaccine shot on a regular basis, but still we don't know right now. So after receiving vaccine, do I need to wear mask? Yes, they are 90 to 95% effective, as most important vaccines are. There is some of the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines have shown the efficacy of 95%, but nothing is 100%. So we have to wear masks, practice social distancing, consistent hand washing. That is equally important. What would be the short-term and long-term side effect? Will this vaccine make me sick? No, I don't think so. Short-term discomfort could be headache, muscle pains, fatigue, chills, fever, pain at injection site. They are normal and generally last for 1 to 2 days. You are still doing your job. You are making antibody. That is a good thing. And side effect may be pronounced after second dose. More serious infection include dyspnea, coughs, fever, sore throat, running loss of taste or smell. You can always consult your healthcare provider. So if you have to, if there are 2 doses are mentioned, you have to come back for the second dose to make it more effective. So another question that arises, Matt, possibly I will wait for other person. Maybe our co-workers have gotten the vaccine and then I'll do that. I consider getting it during maybe second clinic. There's a good concern about that. But there are so many people who have been vaccinated. Many eligible people now, right now in our country, more than 18 years of age has got vaccinated. But you should get vaccinated as soon as possible to have herd immunity in the country. So just like in a staff, you can vaccinate on 2 different days so that a person can have some minor side effect. You can cover up in the subsequent days. The longer each person waits to be vaccinated, the greater chance of getting the original COVID infection. And possibly he will be a spreader to other one. Someone of my family catch COVID-19 from me if I get vaccinated? No, there's no evidence right now with this particular that. Similar thing is that if at least you cannot spread once you are vaccinated. What about pregnancy, breastfeeding, and fertility? Pregnancy, still the trials are going on. Lactating, some vaccines have been approved that can be given for lactating mother. So I'm under 18 years old. Can I still get the vaccine? No. Pfizer, BioNTech has been approved for certain age group from 12 to 18 years. In India, still the research has been going on, and possibly maybe the end of this year, maybe we may have some vaccines for the children also. Are there medical or other contraindication to getting the vaccines? You should always consult with your healthcare provider before getting the vaccines. You are concerned with missing the work, not getting paid. Is that? I don't think so much significant side effect to that. So, as a healthcare worker, you are the leader. You are the role model. You always should tell your vaccine story. You should talk about it, how you make and how you made your decision. Lead by dosing. You can discuss with your staff, family, care partner, your decisions to get the vaccine, and talk about your experience after getting immunized, because more people will get confidence. Talk about how you felt. If any side effect, you can also last for 2 days. You can talk about that also, and continue to provide, listen to questions and provide information. Listen, and listen again. So the most important thing is that you are a role model of the society. So if you take the lead, your patient, your family members, the near about, they will have a confidence in you. So they will follow you. So just have a positive drive for vaccination, because vaccination is very important for at least curtailing this pandemic to achieve the herd immunity. We have been facing this from last 1 year or so. So vaccination, all the myths regarding the vaccination should be solved and should be sorted out. Thank you very much.
Good evening, friends. And this is a great opportunity to come to this platform of family physicians and general practitioners. As everybody has said, even in yesterday's webinar, that you are the backbone of the health system. So I thank CCI and Dr. Krishna and all my other friends on this webinar for giving me this opportunity to come to you and present this today's topic of ivermectin, enoxaparin anticoagulants, and when to treat and when to refer your patient. You know that we have had more than 2 crore 77 lakh cases in India till 29th of May, out of which 2 crores 52 lakhs have already recovered, and to it more number have been added by today. And of course, we know about these two waves which has come, and the second wave which had a very rapid ascent. More number of cases were involved, more number of deaths were there, more number of serious forms of COVID we have seen, and variation in presentations have been seen. And you have also seen all this. You have treated many patients and you have managed them well also. So now that we have acknowledged you as a backbone, it's our responsibility to make you aware of whatever are the recent advances in management or how a patient should be managed. And that is why today's webinar. I'm thankful to earlier presenters yesterday, Dr. Suryakant and Dr. Agam, who have made my job easy for today's presentation. So this webinar is a preparedness. When we go on any journey, we do lots of preparations. There is ticketing, there is reservation, where to say, what stay, what is to be seen, what is to be done, what is to be eaten on roads, what is to be carried, and the medicines, and so on and so forth. Similarly, today's webinar and yesterday's is a preparedness for the so-called whatever has been said about the third wave which is coming, and we expect that we will not have such a third wave which has been as catastrophic as the second wave was, and we do not want that. And if at all our patient, I call them ours, they are yours, they are mine, they are ours. So if these patients come with few of the complications, we should be prepared to deal with them. So which drug is to be given at what time, especially the anticoagulants I'm going to talk about. So the first drug which we are going to talk about is ivermectin. So what is ivermectin? Is it an anti-COVID drug? No, we all know that it is a very approved and effective anti-parasitic agent, but it's also a repurposed drug for COVID, because it's shown to have antiviral activity against various viruses, including influenza, HIV, and dengue, and of course, SARS-CoV-2. So this drug, when it is proved to have an antiviral action, it is approved for treatment of COVID. How does it act? It does not allow binding of the COVID virus, and hence it stops its multiplication also. What are the advantages of ivermectin? You all know that it's easily available. You have lots and lots of experience of using ivermectin. It's an affordable drug. It's a very low cost drug. It hardly costs. Earlier its cost was very less. Now the cost ranges from somewhere between 20 to 25 rupees to 36 rupees per tablet. It has a favorable adverse drug effect profile. What does it mean? That whatever are the common side effects like headache, nausea, dizziness, rash, all these things are easily treatable, easily recognizable by you. So you can tackle if at all there are any adverse drug effects of ivermectin, and there is no resistance to this drug also. So ivermectin, do we have any supporting evidence? The first one was, as yesterday Dr. Suryakant said, ivermectin, they have come out with a white paper which was published in Indian Journal of Tuberculosis, and which said that ivermectin in the dose of 12 milligram BD alone or in combination with other drugs for 5 to 7 days may be considered. This was 1 year ago. So they say that it may be a safe therapeutic options for mild, moderate, or even severe cases of COVID-19 infections. It is cost effective, especially when other drugs are costly and not available. Now that was 10 months ago. Do we have any other supporting evidence? So this is one of the trials which have been published where ivermectin was used as a chemoprophylaxis for COVID-19 and RCT was conducted and they looked whether it's effective or not. And what were the conclusions? The conclusion was ivermectin is suggested to be a promising, effective and safe chemotherapeutic drug in the management of COVID-19. What is other evidence as of today? So this is a review article or a meta-analysis where they have analyzed 56 trials where ivermectin was used for various indications. And is it found effective? So answer is yes. It has been found to be good in prophylaxis. It has been found to be good in early treatment of COVID. It's been found to be quite effective even if it is used in the late treatment or severe forms, and it has helped in decreasing the mortality. And this table slide shows that various studies which have been supporting has supporting evidence for ivermectin in various scenarios. Now this is a prescription where ivermectin has been given for 6 milligrams twice daily. Why I have put here? It's not here to look at the faults. What can be corrected in our prescription is ivermectin is to be given as a single dose 12 milligrams. If at all it is BD, then it is 12 milligrams BD. Do not decrease the dose. And most importantly, it has to be taken empty stomach with water. So do not write after meals. Okay. Then there are guidelines from AIIMS and ICMR also where ivermectin is recommended for mild disease and it is to be given 12 milligrams daily or 200 micrograms per kilograms once a day for 3 days and can be extended for 5 days. So when to use ivermectin? Once we are convinced ivermectin is to be given, when to give? You can give prophylaxis in exposed but asymptomatic cases where there are family contact who is positive. Prophylaxis in exposed and symptomatic cases where RT-PCR is awaited. Then RT-PCR positive asymptomatic cases as well as symptomatic mild cases do give ivermectin as antiviral in the dose of 12 milligrams OD. It can be given for 3 to 5 days for prophylaxis and 5 to 7 days for treatment. This was the slide shown yesterday by Dr. Suryakant, and here I would like to point to prophylaxis for healthcare workers where ivermectin is given on day 1, then day 7 and day 30, and then it is given monthly for in a dose of 12 milligrams OD. A word of caution, as I had said in the earlier prescription, that it has to be given empty stomach with a glass of water, not with food and not after food, which is a usual practice of taking any antiparasitic or antihelminthic drug. Then the contraindications are not to be given in pregnancy and for nursing mothers. Let's come to anticoagulants and low molecular weight heparins like fraxiparin or enoxaparin. Now, low molecular weight heparins are smaller fragments of heparin which has an anticoagulant activity by activating antithrombotic. So what does it do? It does not allow a clot to be formed. Why are we using anticoagulants? Because this slide shows that on the right hand side is the normal alveolus and on the left hand side you can see the alveolus which is infected with COVID, and here you can see that the small vessels have small microthrombi in the blood vessels which does not allow them for the oxygen transportation or transfer to take place, and that is why the patient has hypoxia. So apart from other causes which leads to hypoxia in COVID, formation of microthrombi is one of the reasons. So to take care of these microthrombi in patients who are hypoxic or going in for hypoxia, as is evident by 6-minute walk test, you have to start giving anticoagulants. And this is the site of action of low molecular weight heparins. What are the advantages? Why are we preferring low molecular weight heparin as compared to heparin which we used earlier? Heparin, if used, needs frequent monitoring and can also lead to heparin-induced thrombocytopenia, which will be a worst case scenario because in COVID we have seen, as in other viral infections, and whenever patient has high grade fever, there is depletion of platelets. यानी platelet count कम हो जाता है. If the platelet count is less and you are giving antithrombotic, there are chances of patients having bleeding diathesis, so they can have epistaxis, bleeding from nose, or hemoptysis when they cough, or there are petechial patches on the skin. We do not want them to have this. That is why now we prefer using low molecular weight heparin like enoxaparin or dalteparin, which have a longer duration of action, and lab monitoring of anticoagulant effect is generally not needed. So you don't need to keep on doing repeated bleeding time, clotting time, INR, and so on. So these drugs are now preferred to be used. So indications for low molecular weight heparin, these are the common indications where even COVID may be not there. So any patient who has DVT, unstable angina, treatment of venous thromboembolism in pregnancy, or previous history of cerebrovascular episodes where there was a clot. Are there any recommendations for anticoagulation? Coagulants? Yes. In moderate and severe forms of COVID, whenever patients are hypoxic and there are high inflammatory markers released, then along with the steroids, we give patient anticoagulants, and the conventional dose which is mentioned in the guidelines are 0.5 milligrams per kilogram per day, which comes to approximately 4,000 international units. And of course, the underlying thing is that there should be no contraindication or high risk of bleeding in that particular patient. Now, this is a prescription where everything is written well, but for how many days the anticoagulants are to be given is not written properly. You cannot have a common factor of 5 days or 7 days for each drug you have to write. Otherwise, patient will keep on refilling the prescription and we keep on taking drugs and they come up with the side effects. Now, factors where you should be specially cautious, यानी आपके patient को low molecular weight heparin चल रहा है या oral anticoagulants, you have to be cautious that there should not be a bleeding history, there should not be a history of coagulopathy, or when you ask for the CBC or TLC-DLC, you look at the platelet count, it should not be less than 50,000, and there should not be simultaneous use of other anticoagulants. So if you have a patient who has hypertension, IHD, or had previous CV and already on ecosprin or low doses of aspirin, then you have to stop one drug and give other, or continue with whatever drug is being advised to that particular patient. So contraindications to all heparins, as I have said, trauma, hemorrhagic disorders, peptic ulcer, cerebral hemorrhage, or recent surgery. So any COVID patient who comes to you and is going to the moderate stage of disease and you want to add anticoagulants, ask for history of all these questions for bleeding diathesis, as well as ask for history of risk of causing thrombosis, and then take a rational decision of putting a patient on anticoagulants. What are the different formulations? We have different low molecular weight heparin formulations like enoxaparin, which comes in pre-filled syringes of 4,000 international units. Remember, it has to be given subcutaneously, and the dose range, the price ranges from somewhere around 350 to 400 rupees. Same for the dalteparin and fraxiparin, all come in pre-filled syringes, and you have to give them subcutaneously. Are there current guidelines for use of these drugs for after discharge also? This slide is specially for after discharge. So patients who are not critically ill, no, there is no need of extended prophylaxis after discharge. However, if there is a risk of thrombosis, the International Society on Thrombosis and Hemostasis recommends that you can give, and if there is low risk of bleeding but high risk of thrombosis, you should give anticoagulants even after discharge. However, for all cases who are non-hospitalized, routine prophylaxis is not recommended unless there is a risk of thrombosis, as we have discussed earlier. Now, talking about the newer oral anticoagulant drugs. These are oral drugs. These are little costly than the oral drug which was earlier in use like warfarin. But it is safer than warfarin because you don't need to monitor the INR. Its dose is once a day, so easy to monitor. Once you stop giving the drug, its action also stops within 12 hours to 24 hours. You can use this after the patient is discharged from the hospital, where facilities of continued subcutaneous injectables is not possible and patient needs to be given after discharge. It can be used after LMWH or stop and prophylactically if needed in a patient where there are lots of skin lesions and injectables cannot be given, then you can give oral drugs also. Which are these drugs? One is rivaroxaban, where you need to give doses 10 milligrams daily for prophylaxis or 20 milligrams OD as a therapy. And the other drug is dabigatran. The dose is 110 milligrams OD as prophylaxis and 150 milligrams BD if you have to use as therapeutic. Issues are only of cost. Now, when to refer the patient? You will refer the patient in following conditions. So, before we go to the reference, these guidelines which I am telling now are just like announcements which are made in the flight for safety of passengers. So, when do we refer the patient? We would refer the patient when you are monitoring him well and you become aware about all the red signals when you come across them, or what we call as warning signals or red flag signs when you come across. So this is a monitoring sheet which you give to your COVID case, and on it the name is written, the comorbid conditions are written, any drugs for those comorbid conditions, and whether these conditions are controlled or not. Then in the parameters to be recorded, there are temperature, pulse, BP, SpO2 or any other parameters. And such type of record if kept gives you at a glance, let you know whether patient is stable, whether patient is improving or patient is deteriorating. So if you have such charts, it would be so easy for you to monitor and you can refer the patients timely whenever there are red flag signs. So this is an example of one of my patients who had kept the chart and she allowed me to show this. Then in 6-minute walk test, when you are monitoring, whenever there is fall by 3 to 4 reading, this is the time when you should be cautious that the patient may develop hypoxia. And 6-minute walk test is not recommended for patients older than 70 years or those who have asthma or pregnant patients. Now, this is a chart of symptoms at a glance. So, any symptom like fever, cough beyond 5 days or it recurs on 6th day, this is the time you must become cautious and refer the patient. Whenever the respiratory rate is more than 24, SpO2 falls below 94, refer the patient and let the patient take a prescription and evaluation from the consultant or the expert, and then patient can come back to you for follow-up or reporting. Asymptomatic and mild cases, you are treating and you are treating them very well, but be cautious, monitor them, let the patient know the red flag sign so that he reports immediately to you. When will you refer? Any mild patient who goes to moderate phase, that is, there is shortness of breath, they have difficulty in breathing, respiratory rate is more than 24, SpO2 falls below 94 at room air, or any other new symptom comes like chest pain comes, weakness comes, convulsions come, refer the patient to the consultant or the specialist or admit in the dedicated COVID care hospital. It's very important that you monitor and timely referring the patient so that patient gets appropriate treatment, monitoring, oxygen and recovers rapidly. Timely referral, what is your timely referral going to do? It allows the patient to have good treatment. It decreases the hospitalization or the stay in the hospital decreases the complication, decreases the fear of mortality. Similarly, a patient who does not find a bed when he was moderately ill requests you or remains under your observation, as we have seen in the second wave. Many patients could not get oxygen, could not get beds. Few of them may develop severe disease. This is the time when you refer them to the hospital which has ICU. So any patients whose oxygen saturation falls below 90, you should be making attempts to shift the patient to a hospital with ICU beds and oxygen beds. So warning signs, as I have mentioned earlier, breathing difficulty, drowsiness, when SpO2 falls below 94, oral temperature is more than 101 after 5 days, excessive fatigue, cough, mental confusion, refer the patient. Slurred speech, seizures, weakness, refer the patient. And that is why strict monitoring is needed after 5 days of symptom onset. In the first wave, we used to say that the storm would come at 8 days to 12 days. But we have seen that in the second wave, you should be extra cautious even at day 5 and onwards. So this is very important that you observe, monitor, and timely refer your patients. If your patient does not get a bed, then make arrangements of oxygen or ask family members to make it and counsel the patient, support the patient, give psychological support. It's very important, and that only you can do for your patient. Observe the heart rate, the pulse, BP, whether patient is sweating, where consciousness is maintained or not, and instruct the family members not to give anything orally if patient is acutely hypoxic or coughing. Do not give anything orally if patient is delirious, and make attempts for patient to rest, to have prone ventilation to improve the saturation. This is the time when you start patients on steroid when patient is in moderate phase, and when patient is going from moderate to severe, start anticoagulants, but ensure that patient finds a bed even in spite of waiting for a day or two at home. So this is a chart which shows about the prone ventilation and various positions which can be taken. It was discussed yesterday also, so I'm not going to go into the details. You can have a chart and display or hand it over to your patients. Then there are just a word of caution. Patients who were hospitalized, timely referred by you, came out very well and are now discharged. Please keep them under your follow-up and be watchful for hyperglycemia, because you have to test their sugar. They have received steroids. Look for comorbidities and if they are having any complications, antibiotics dose and duration, and refer the patients back to the consultants to decide for how long this treatment has to be continued, how it is to be modified or stopped. If there are any new symptoms after 15 days, 20 days, 1 month, then refer the patient to the specialist which is needed. So if they have eye problem, mouth problem, dental problem, refer to dentist, ophthalmologist or ENT surgeon. Remember, there can be worsening of respiratory symptoms, there can be hemoptysis, chest pain, seizures or alteration of consciousness even after discharge. So this is not to make fear amongst you or your patients. Be aware of these symptoms and timely refer your patients so that their post-COVID scenario is also taken care of and they come out of all these complaints and symptoms very well with your support. So there should be a perfect balance of optimum treatment, best outcome to avoid drug interaction as well as ADR. And what is needed is your supervision, monitoring, guidance, and timely referral is needed for each and every patient of you to come out of this fear and menace of COVID infection and disease. And last but not the least, Ankit has already commented upon this. Even if your patients have come out of COVID and vaccinated, please ensure and emphasize on COVID appropriate behavior with mask, distancing, avoiding crowds, follow cough etiquette and hand hygiene, because though vaccines do help, they are at a fear of getting infection again if they do not follow this. Please display such charts of hand hygiene, respiratory hygiene and physical distancing and ensure that other family members of the patients follow this and they remain protected. Thank you for your patient listening. For 2 days, you are listening to these webinars. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Radha Munje and Dr. Ankit for excellent talks on an important topic, and definitely it was useful for me as well. I learned a lot about vaccination and on ivermectin. Well covered. Wow. Actually, very good. And as usual, there are a good number of logins today. Being Monday, I think not as much as yesterday. 1,250 is the last count. I'm sure there will be much more. And once again, thank you for the excellent talks on vaccine as well as on ivermectin and anticoagulation. So let's see what type of questions we have. To start with, let me ask Dr. Ankit one question that is frequently asked, which is not there in the chat box, which is not there in the question box. I will ask you one question to start the question and answer on this webinar. Most frequently asked question, I believe, is on alcohol and vaccination. Ankit, let me start with a humorous question. Yes, and this keeps coming up again and again. I believe this is the most frequently asked.
Yes, sir, definitely. This question has been a very prominent question among the friend circle. Friend usually ask about the relationship between the alcohol and vaccines per se, but there is no any concrete data right now to suggest that there could be some correlations with alcohol and vaccine. Maybe something related to impairment of immunity in the long run but not in the acute stages. So still data is not so concrete which can show there is any relationship with alcohol and vaccines.
So what would you advise? I'm teasing you.
Just as well-being, we will try to tell them to avoid alcohol in general.
Yeah.
In particular.
Yes. Yes, absolutely right. I keep a background check. If somebody is a chronic alcoholic, troubling at home, then I will definitely say I think it's a good idea to stop alcohol for forever, so that the family is also pleased about it. And as you rightly said, scientifically there is no real data on interaction between vaccine and alcohol. The very early days, I think the Russian Sputnik, that was the one which said including the president, said that please avoid alcohol for some time. As you know, Russians don't drink one peg of alcohol, and they finish the bottles. So that is why that was the warning. I think that was given. And it holds good here also. I think if somebody is an alcoholic, this is the time we must take opportunity and and counsel them about alcohol in addition. Okay, excellent talk. And as I said, there are some very good question. Satish, after taking vaccination, is there any diet to follow? Ankit, would you advise? I think this is also another question. People ask about. Can I have chicken? Can I have fish? Can I have, any food? And as you know, all Indians are worried about in any disease, about food. And food is the most important thing in our lives. So, Ankit, is there any dietary restriction to follow?
Yes, sir. I think, sir, COVID vaccine has to be take care just like any other vaccination that has been done past. We have been taking flu shots. So just after getting vaccinated, take proper rest, take proper what we call as diet and all that. no exaggerated, because maybe you had some problem with the exaggerated diet, and we could be misnomered with due to the effect of vaccines. So just be normal with your diet and your intake and your rest with the vaccines.
Okay. Yeah, excellent. Dr. Radha, there is a question for you. This is from Dr. Nagasridhar Rao from Andhra Pradesh, Kurnool. He wants to know about a COVID positive patient after full-term gestation, underwent C-section, mildly symptomatic, saturation above 96, D-dimer rise to 3-fold. Do we start anticoagulation because post C-section D-dimer is usually raised? He's also asking question, but he's also saying what we should do. And you covered it very well about the complication and side effects and so on. Yes.
Yes. Actually, I did not get his question. What he said he was talking about a full-term female.
Yes, and delivered already postpartum. The the D-dimer is 3-fold rise. So he also thinks D-dimer is delivered postpartum.
Yes, we already have discussed this in the presentation also, that
yes.
Any patient who has undergone surgery should not be put on anticoagulants, because the wound healing may not be there. There would be bleeding from the site. So at that time, anticoagulants are not given, even if these short-acting or the low molecular weight heparins are safe. They are not advised unless there is a very high risk of thrombosis. And even if a patient is positive and pregnancy is a prothrombotic stage, and you add another prothrombotic stage like COVID, now that the patient has delivered, patient is free of these things. So we should wait. We should not give anticoagulation.
Okay. And on the same type of question, on the corollary, during pregnancy, Dr. Radha, you also find D-dimer elevated, first trimester, second trimester, third trimester, even more. And when they have a COVID, there is always this doubt, should they do anticoagulation, not anticoagulation? This question keeps coming back, especially people ask me also about this.
Yes. In fact, I have myself not come across many such situations. However, yes. I happened to discuss with one of my gynecologist friends, and what she said that if there is a female who is having a precious pregnancy, so for example, there are already increased chances of a thrombosis which is pregnancy induced. Then at that time, if there is COVID, they start, or they would prefer us to start with anticoagulants. However, once anticoagulants start, they would not like to stop it completely and would continue prophylactically at least twice a week till the patient becomes full term and is on the verge of delivery. So whichever mode, maybe the mode of delivery then, even if it is a planned Caesar or an emergency or a normal, they would just stop giving this low molecular weight heparin 1 day prior or 12 hours prior at max.
Okay. So, I mean, I will also add something, chip in with something. I get a lot of questions also because my wife is also a gynecologist. And then I keep seeing her patients, and also I was giving a talk in the Bangalore Obstetric and Gynecology. So these questions came up. I think it's an important question. You rightly said that if you start, it has to be continual. So you go by the severity of the disease, not by the D-dimer, which you also mentioned, especially after discharge. You also mentioned in general that go by the severity of the illness and then give the anticoagulation, which I certainly agree. If the patient has only a D-dimer which is elevated in pregnancy, I don't think we should be worried too much about it. If patient has hypoxemia, if the CRP is elevated, patient is definitely in the hospital, then there is a role for, continuing anticoagulation and not to worry about the D-dimer. Okay, let's see. There's another question. Ankit, there's a question from Samira from Kerala. Any time gap to be advised between rabies vaccine and COVID vaccine? I think, they must have seen somebody bitten by, a stray dog, and, somebody wanted to know about the rabies vaccine and the COVID vaccine.
In general, sir, any vaccines of two different parts, there should be at least a gap of 14 days between the two vaccines.
I certainly agree with you, including the flu vaccine. When you give a flu vaccine, you give a gap of 2 weeks, isn't it? I think this holds good. I think that was excellent. There is this question. Any harm in giving iron preparation to a patient with high ferritin level? Dr. Radha, you have anything on this high ferritin level? And, if you have to give iron.
It will be decided on case-to-case basis. I don't think we can have a very dogmatic answer for this. If there is severe anemia, the best thing would be that if it is around, say, 5 grams or somewhere between 7, then blood transfusion itself would be good. If at all they have to give iron, yes, they can give. But now I think they need to be extra cautious and decide about the whether there would be more harm or benefit, because it would take a longer time for anemia. Because the indications of iron, as we all know, is only anemia, right? If there is severe anemia, you would treat by blood transfusion. If there is borderline, you can give iron, because ferritin, even if it is raised, iron may not be available at that particular time, and it's only an effect related with the COVID disease. So I think, in my opinion, I may be wrong, I stand corrected, because I have not anticipated this question and I wasn't prepared for that.
Okay, actually it's excellent answer. I had one patient who was a young lady whose hemoglobin was only 6, and she had COVID in addition, and she had to be hospitalized not for COVID, for giving a blood transfusion, and there's no contraindication, as you rightly said, case by case.
We decide on case-to-case basis, and if it is as acute as that, saving lives at the time of delivery, because she has severe anemia, she's going to deliver. Saving lives are more important.
Okay. Yes, I think that was excellent, Dr. Radha. So another question, in post-COVID patient, Ankit, this is for you. This is directed towards you. In post-COVID patient, after first dose of vaccine, if neutralizing antibodies are more than 250, does this patient need second dose?
Yes.
Sir, there is always a debate now. It's going on right now. I was just seeing the television and there was some debate going on Z News.
Okay.
Some research from VHU was there. After getting COVID, you just need 1 dose. But I'm not sure about it. As far as till we don't have a concrete data, how much antibodies, because we don't know type of antibodies generated with the actual infection. And if a manufacturer recommends a 2 dose of particular vaccine, till we don't have a concrete data, I think we should go by the manufacturer part of the dosing regime that is there. If they recommend 2 doses, then we should go 2 doses.
Yeah, I think you're right. We should do it in India. Yeah. Yeah, you want to come in, Radha, and say something?
Yes.
I will also add something for this.
I agree with what Dr. Ankit is saying, that yes, second dose should be received, because we do not know that at exact which cutoff point of antibody level would be offering highest protection against infection as well as severe forms of disease. So you need to have, and then you do not know how long the antibodies will remain.
Yes.
At those high levels.
Yeah, I think that's yeah, I think it's a good answer. But you know, if you dig in deeply, the vaccinologist, as they call, especially from London, this lady was professor was saying that if you are already you know or if you have already been infected, even one dose is enough. But the data is not out. I think we will have clear picture later. So then Ankit, continuing with the same kind of question, there is another teaser. Is mixing doses of vaccine allowed in India or any other country? Mix and match.
I discussed in my presentation also, sir. These vaccines are different mechanisms. If you consider India, there are 3 vaccines. Sputnik would be available. If you consider Covishield and Covaxin, they are based on different mechanism. So as per both these mechanisms, we need 2 doses for both the vaccines, and they develop by a primary immunological response and the secondary immunological response. Right now, we don't have much extensive studies or much extensive cases in which the 2 vaccines have been mixed. So till now, we are not sure if the primary response is developed by one, it will be potentiated by the secondary immunological response to the other. Maybe we can continue with the 2 doses of the same vaccine, and if the subsequent year, maybe if we are taking an annual flu shots, just like we are taking, maybe we can switch over to the another vaccine. That
okay. I think
data.
Yeah, there is some data coming up. For example, I think from Latin America, where there was a shortage of vaccine after the first Pfizer vaccine, they didn't have. So they gave, Covishield, and which is AstraZeneca's available, and they showed very good response. It's a very practical question, because I just this evening, one of my friends, my son who had come from US, he has taken Pfizer vaccine first dose, and then he was asking me, can I take Pfizer? And I said Pfizer not available. It's going to take some time. But when are you going back? He said, I may not go back for, some time. So I said, just wait and watch, we may get Pfizer. If we don't get, I think maybe, I should give this because there are some, trials going on. Okay, moving on. Why there is high mortality among doctors even after 2 doses of vaccine?
That is a very tricky question to answer, sir. It is, as we know, that after 2 weeks of second dose, you have your immunological response. The cells are there to protect you from the particular virus. And it has also been said that generally, most of the vaccine data trials has that you would mostly have 100% protection with the severe cases. So we don't know when our colleagues, when our doctor fraternity colleagues has been exposed during that part. Maybe immediately after the second. Some of the colleagues I know, they have been exposed after an adequate time after the second dose. Maybe the comorbid conditions they may be having with more intensity, so that could not be resistant. So I don't have a definitive mechanism for it, but many theories exist for it.
But it's not high mortality that we are seeing.
Very low. It's very low.
Yeah, we are not seeing very high mortality. We are seeing here and there.
Our colleagues, if they have contracted COVID after the second dose, they are only of mild nature, maybe 1 or 2 days of fever, and that have been subsided. So
okay. Dr. Radha,
shall we add something to this? Shall we add something to this? I feel that the doctors who are infected, whether they were before vaccination or after vaccination, the most important thing is that they need to have rest and good sleep. Many of the doctors stretch themselves when they have symptoms. They know that they might come positive, but they work for those 2-3 extra days, which I think should not be doing, and they should keep their own health as a priority. That is my personal opinion.
Good advice. Good advice. Good advice. Okay. Continuing, Dr. Radha, for you, there's an interesting question. Patient on, this is again from Kurnool, patient on prophylactic oral anticoagulant develops bleeding. How to treat? How would you treat this patient?
There has to be antidotes for those drugs, and
Yes.
it has to be clean. And many patients we have seen, they were on ecosprin or low dose aspirin, and you have to just stop the drugs and the people respond to it. For few of the drugs, if they are on anticoagulants, they may need to be treated with vitamin K. So it depends on which drug is being used, and that is, you have to give antidotes. But most of these low molecular weight heparin as well as oral anticoagulants are safe, and once you stop that particular dose, patient would respond quite early. Dr.
Okay.
Ankit, you want to add something to it?
I will, yeah.
In this regard, definitely.
Yeah, I think, you're right. And there are some antidotes available for particular
Yes.
NOACs.
Yes.
For example, I think rivaroxaban and,
Yes.
Pixaban, unfortunately, antidote not available, but they are available, but they are unusual. As you said, stop the drug, take care. If it is especially aspirin, you give, definitely, replacement with blood and so on. But as you also said, vitamin K can be given. So this is excellent, and we have something like 1,300 login, and which shows that even on a Monday, very popular webinar series. Thanks to my speakers, my panelists, they've done a good job. And continuing with that, Dr. Radha, there is one very good question. What's the dose of warfarin if there is no other option available? Very good question. We used to use all this, warfarin, acetrom, all this. So what is the dose you think?
Warfarin for 5 milligram BD is the dose when you give them as oral anticoagulant. But you have to, most importantly, you have to keep on monitoring the bleeding time, clotting time, and INR. If you find that the INR is not favorable, then you have to withhold giving warfarin or decrease its dose.
Yeah, I think, yes. I mean, one can still use it. The only difficulty is, as you rightly mentioned, that you have to monitor these patients and do the blood test again and again. There could be a lot of drug interactions.
Yes. And I think another reason for people opting for newer drugs, especially in this COVID era, is because for monitoring, if you have to give blood, you cannot go out because you are positive. You have to call somebody from the laboratory to take the samples, or if you are too ill to go. So perhaps these are few difficulties placed, as well as the safety profile, which has made oral newer drugs more popular. Easy to prescribe, easy to take once a day, and easy to monitor, easy to wean away the effect. You stop the drug and the effect will wean off rapidly.
Yeah.
I think it's been made too easy.
Okay. Ankit, there's a question which you have answered. I will just say, post-COVID, how much gap for vaccine? I think it is 3 months. Let me move on. There's somehow this unusual question, not regarding this topic, has come up. The role of methylene blue. I think this question should go to Dr. Krishna only, and he is the best person to answer this. Let's move on. Dr. Satish, sir, after taking vaccination, is there any diet? Or I think that we have finished. Can a short course of methylprednisolone 32 milligram per day for a week be stopped immediately or tapered gradually to half every third day? Dr. Agam did a good job, fantastic job yesterday on covering this topic. And I think short courses, I'll answer quickly for want of time. Short courses can be stopped. There's no problem, which we have learned from our acute asthma treatment. No need to taper after 2 weeks. Only you need to do that. So, okay. Multiple sclerosis, Dr. Ankit, which vaccine is ideal? You have answer. I have 2 patients on that. I can tell about it, but Do you have anything to add to this? Nothing particular, isn't it?
There's no particular.
Yeah. So one can definitely, take. Okay, second wave, monitor up to 2 weeks. Mild patients are getting serious in the second or third week, especially in the second wave. Dr. Radha, you want to answer this quickly? In the second wave, there are many who are getting serious and sick in the second and third week. Is that what you are seeing in your hospitals, Dr. Radha?
No. What we are seeing rather in second wave is people become serious and ill at the end of first week and at the beginning of second week.
Yes.
That is what we have observed. If somebody is becoming more sick after second week or in the third week, this is perhaps due to some complications which has occurred either during hospitalization or even at home. Because I have seen many patients who are put on oxygen at home. It must be everybody's experience. Somehow, what the family members do is they put oxygen because they have not been trained how to monitor. As soon as SpO2 becomes above 96, they wait for 10-15 minutes. Then they would reduce or stop oxygen. And they say कि जब ऑक्सीजन लगाते हैं सैचुरेशन नॉर्मल हो जाता है, जब ऑक्सीजन करते हैं वो फिर से नीचे चला जाता है. So you have to tell them that once put on oxygen, there is no need for you to titrate unless your doctor is happy about maintained saturation. Then all lab parameters have come down, and that is the time that at least for 3 to 4 days your patient has received the steroids, anticoagulants, patient is stable, there is no need of increase in the oxygen or patient has a feeling of well-being. That is the time when you can reduce by 2 liters, observe the patient, and then that can be done stepwise. So I think when these are being managed at home, these are few issues which come out, and especially we know we had shortage. So people used oxygen also very sparingly at home. And that has been a sad story, of course. But you have to counsel and train the family members. So if the patient is in hospital, they can have different complications of secondary infections or otherwise. Similarly, if they are treated at home, there may be few complications because of a sustained hypoxia. Then at home, the patients are resting because the family members are caring so much for them. They may have DVTs and they may have problems of embolism also, we do not. So perhaps these things come in the second and third week.
I think that was an excellent practical answer. Stay on the screen, Dr. Radha. You're very popular. There's a question for you. There is a link. Is there a link between low molecular weight, heparin dose and D-dimer value? Can stop low molecular weight even if the D-dimer is high and patient other parameters have improved. So is there a relationship between D-dimer value and then the dose of low molecular weight? Do you go by that or do you go by the clinical, spectrum?
Initially, when you are starting, you look at the D-dimer. Because once you have put the patient on anticoagulants, you would be repeating these parameters after, say, every 48 hours, if not 24 hours. So if the patient is hospitalized, the protocol is different. If patient is at home, you can repeat at second day or third day. And once you see that the trend of D-dimer is falling, it would take some time to normalize. So just don't look at D-dimer and keep on continuing anticoagulants. That is what I think, and that is also in the literature, that D-dimer may continue to be high for some time and it will take a longer time to normalize. So you can stop anticoagulants or switch from injectables to orals if there is existing or pre-existing risk of thrombosis. Just don't look at the values, evaluate the patient as a whole.
Excellent practical, point that you mentioned about don't look at the D-dimer if you are giving anticoagulation and then wait for it to settle down. Don't go on doing every second day, third day. It won't come down. It doesn't, need to come down. You are treating the patient. You are not treating the D-dimer. Excellent. That was an excellent answer. Fragmin versus Clexane? Which one?
I don't think there is much of a difference, but single dose, so people go in for Clexane for safety and single dose, and waning of effect is also very fast of this injection Clexane.
Okay. Okay. There is something about, what you mentioned, about being strong mentally in the isolation period and so on. See the question about mental, probably mind for home isolation with mild symptoms and vivid, I think that's a, question that I'm not able to get. I think be strong mentally and be positive and do that. And okay, can you take a question in Hindi, which
yes,
I sent it?
Definitely. Yes, you can read out and I'll answer.
Sorry.
You can read and I can answer.
Oh God. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I think I've sent it in the box. You can see that.
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
I remember.
You can
there
see
is
that.
A question.
I'll also, you answer.
It's a wonderful question. Who has posed that question, Dr. Satish? It's a wonderful question. Question है, फेफड़े पूरी तरह से काम कर रहे हैं कि नहीं, ये जानकारी कैसे मिलती है? I will first try to answer this question in relevance to COVID. In COVID, lungs यानी आपके फेफड़े जो है, ये ऐसा एक ऑर्गन है जो कोविड में हमेशा सबसे पहले और सबसे ज्यादा इफेक्ट होता है, या उस पर कोविड की मार होती है या बैठती है या चोट पहुंचती है. तो आपके फेफड़े कोविड में काम अच्छी तरह से कर रहे हैं कि नहीं, ये आपको कैसे पता चलता है? फर्स्ट एंड फॉरमोस्ट रेस्पिरेटरी रेट, यानी आप जो सांस ले रहे हैं ये हर मिनट कैसे चल रही है. अगर आपकी सांस आराम से 12, 14 या 16 तक भी चल रही है तो ये नॉर्मल है, आपके फेफड़े ठीक से काम कर रहे हैं, उस पर कोई बर्डन नहीं आ रहा है. अगर ये आपकी सांस की रफ्तार बढ़ने लगती है और ये बाद में जाके 22, 24, 26 ठीक हो जाती है, तो आप समझ के चलिए कि आपके फेफड़ों ने चोट खाई है और आपके फेफड़े 100% काम करने के काबिल नहीं रहे हैं. सेकेंड थिंग इज आपका हार्ट रेट, यानी आप जो पल्स ऑक्सीमीटर से देख रहे हैं, तो आप जब ऑक्सीजन सैचुरेशन देखते हैं, तो जब ये ऑक्सीजन 94 के नीचे जाता है, इसका मतलब है कि आपके फेफड़ों को कहीं ना कहीं कुछ चोट आई है और आपके फेफड़े पूरी तरह से काम करने के लिए सक्षम नहीं रहेंगे. एट द सेम टाइम अगर ऑक्सीजन सैचुरेशन 94-95 मेंटेन है, मगर उस वक्त आपकी पल्स रेट यानी आपकी हार्ट की बीट्स की रफ्तार अगर बढ़ रही है और वो 100 से ज्यादा 110, 120 आगे बढ़ रही है, इसका मतलब है आपका जो ऑक्सीजन यानी फेफड़ा जो काम कर रहा है, इट इज एट द कॉस्ट ऑफ बर्डन ऑन द हार्ट, यानी आपके हार्ट पे प्रेशर आ रहा है ये ऑक्सीजन मेंटेन करते वक्त. तो इसका मतलब है कि कहीं ना कहीं आपके फेफड़ों ने चोट खाई है. अगर इसके बाद ये क्लिनिकल पैरामीटर्स हो गए, आपको बार बार पसीने छूट रहे हैं, आपको बार बार खांसी आ रही है, बोलते वक्त आप सेंटेंस कंप्लीट नहीं कर पा रहे हैं, इसका मतलब कहीं ना कहीं आपके फेफड़ों पे असर हुआ है और वो 100% काम नहीं कर पा रहे हैं. इसके बाद अगर आप सही वक्त पे डॉक्टर के पास पहुंचते हैं और दवाई से ये सारे पैरामीटर्स कम होते हैं, तो हम जानते हैं कि कहीं ना कहीं इंप्रूवमेंट हो रही है. इसी के वजह से मेरे प्रेजेंटेशन में मैंने एक प्रोन वेंटिलेशन का एक चार्ट दिखाया है, जो आपको आपके पेशेंट्स को समझाना है, ताकि आप अगर पोजीशन चेंज करते हो, आपके फेफड़ों का थोड़ा सा बहुत हिस्सा ऐसा होता है जो आपकी रोजमर्रा की जिंदगी में काम में नहीं आता है, ऑक्सीजनेशन के वक्त इसको आपका शरीर उपयोग में नहीं लाता है, या हो सकता है कि ये एल्वियोलाई यानी आपके लंग्स का वो भाग ऑक्सीजन पाने के लिए खुला ही नहीं है. तो जब आप प्रोन वेंटिलेशन में आपका पोजीशन चेंज करते हैं, प्रोन वेंटिलेशन यानी आप औंधे मुंह पेशेंट को सोने के लिए कहते हैं, आप हमेशा पीठ के बल सोते हो, लेकिन आप अगर आपके बाएं बाजू या दाएं बाजू में सोते हैं,
या औंधे मुंह सोते हैं तो आपके फेफड़ों का वो हिस्सा जो आज तक काम में नहीं आ रहा था, उसको बस ब्लड ही मिल रहा था लेकिन ऑक्सीजन नहीं आ रहा है, ऑक्सीजन का आपके फेफड़ों में से खून में जाने का जो परसेंटेज है वो कम था, तो आप जब ये पोजीशन चेंज करते हो तो आपका लंग ये ऑक्सीजन आपके खून में पहुंचाने में मदद करता है, जिसको हम कहते हैं रिक्रूटमेंट। तो आपके जो एल्वियोला या फेफड़ों का जो हिस्सा वो आज तक काम में नहीं लाया था, आज आप काम में ला रहे हो, इसके वजह से आपका ऑक्सीजन लेवल बढ़ता है, सुधर जाता है, और भले ही आपके फेफड़ों को चोट लगी है फिर भी आप
Excellent.
आपके फेफड़ों को चोट पहुंची है फिर भी आप ऑक्सीजन की प्रतिपूर्ति कर पा रहे हैं।
Excellent, excellent. You made it so simple. Even I could understand from Bangalore. Excellent. Okay. Okay. There is this question. I think anybody can take it. Not particularly for today's topic, but it's a very interesting topic. It says, sometimes low-grade pyrexia persists even after 2 to 3 weeks, 99 to 99.6. What does it indicate? Can we go for a short course of steroid? So I'll take this up since it is not regarding today's topic. Low-grade pyrexia persists after 2 to 3 weeks. Very good question. Yes, we have seen that, but you don't have to do anything if other parameters are normal. You do a CRP and CBC and see what it is. Under D-dimer, sometimes pyrexia can be there in any thromboembolic phenomena. Number one. Number two, if the CRP is mildly elevated, you can just leave it. Many a time it goes on for weeks and months. You can use simple, paracetamol, for this. That will help you. People also have used something like colchicine. A short course of 10 days colchicine has been used, 0.5 milligram 3 times a day for 5 days, followed by 0.5 milligram twice a day for 5 days. I have a couple of patients and I have done that. Excellent question, but you don't have to give steroid just because there is mild pyrexia. If CRP is not elevated and if the oxygen is normal, you don't have to give it. Okay, let's move on. I think just a couple of questions and then we are really up against the time. If Dr. Ankit, this is directed towards you. If any vaccine is not effective after second dose, can we take other vaccine? Not effective.
Not effective. First, the question is that how would judge that it is not effective?
Yes, absolutely.
Possibly the antibody titers, maybe one thing, but we are not sure about it, about the method it's done.
Yeah. Yes. Maybe like maybe he's talking like a booster, which we don't know at all, how long and all that. There are trials which are going on. I don't think, we should worry too much about it. That's right. Okay. Okay, let's see. Efficacy of mixing vaccination, I think we already spoke. Okay, patient on anti-TB medication, can he take vaccine?
I think
I had 2 patients asking this.
Yes, we
today.
Can. I think they can take.
Yeah, good. Yes, I think simple, answer. Yes, he must take. Okay, there is this question, Ankit. Patient on immunosuppressant like steroids, Endoxan, or other like probably MMF. He has taken first dose of Covishield before immunosuppressant. How safe is it to take the second dose of Covishield and after how many weeks? I think it's a very good question. And I will also chip in, but you can go ahead.
Definitely, sir. If the patient has taken one vaccine before that and his first initial response would be low, and he's already on immunosuppressant, definitely he can take the second dose. There is some papers which say that maybe once you are in clinical situation where you can taper the dose of those immunosuppressant to some extent, maybe to the tunes of very low level, then possibly you can go ahead with the second dose of vaccine. There is one thought.
Okay. Yeah, I think so. I mean, let me come in. As you rightly said, you can reduce the dose if permissible. For example, if patient's condition, does not allow, for example, renal transplant patient, you need not reduce. And if it is allowed, if it is possible, you reduce it to less than 7.5 milligram of the steroid, and then one can take the vaccine. Prior is 2 to 4 weeks, some say 6 weeks, and then after that you can still do that for about few weeks if permissible. But I've also seen, when I had a patient from London, and he was asking that he was on steroid for ulcerative colitis, so can he take a Pfizer vaccine? I said, even the guidelines there, NHS guidelines says in a pandemic and ravaging pandemic there in UK, don't worry about all this, please take it. There may not be good, antibody response, but it doesn't matter. But take it, even if it is 50%, it's going to, protect you. I think the last question, we have overstepped, I think 5 minutes. Any relation to sulfa allergy? Do you think, any drug allergy, patient should worry about it?
Sir, not really. But they should always, consult to their primary clinician before taking a vaccine and give their proper detailed drug history. Definitely during the vaccination time, the patient could be more appropriately and timely monitored for any kind of reaction. I think it's more than that.
Yeah, I think so. I give myself as an example, like, I have, 4 types of allergy, drug allergy. So I say, I have taken, nothing happened to me, so don't worry about it. So you're right. I think that's, great. And I don't think I have any more questions from the chat box. And I really, enjoyed, this discussion, especially, about the question and answer. They're very practical questions and ground level, grassroots level, when the family physicians face, these kind of questions. And I am very happy about the way, the question and answers, the talk. I learned a lot myself, and very happy for your preparation, Dr. Ankit and Dr. Radha Munje. And she did a very good job, and both of you did a very good job, sticking on to the time first, and then the question and answers. Even though it's a Monday, I think we have a record number of login for a Monday. Remember, for a Monday, the record login, the Sunday is different, Ankit. Monday is different. Monday is a working day. So we have a record. Okay, I thank the organizers, CCI, and, ever-loving support of the CCI family, and the sponsors, JB Chemicals, for giving us an opportunity to do this, 2-day webinar. And yesterday's was followed by, today. I learned a lot myself from the yesterday and today, even though it was directed towards family physicians. First of all, we must be good family physicians to become, specialists and super specialists. Yes. I thank one and all, who have logged in on a Monday, on a busy day, and be with us till 9:45 now, and thank you so much.
We should have a one-liner message from each of us for our audience.
Yeah. You start, Radha. Yes, well done. You start.
It has been wonderful meeting all my family physicians and general practitioners on this platform. And I have only one single liner to tell you, that you have been doing an excellent job. Continue it by proper monitoring and timely referral for any new symptom, any complications that you note, so that your patient is benefited and comes back to you hale and hearty.
Excellent. Ankit?
Our frontline physicians, they did a very great job in the last 1 year. They have dealt with all their patients. Timely diagnosis is important, and the starting of the treatment monitoring is a very part in this. Be as a frontliner in vaccines also, because you are the role model for the society. If you get vaccinated and just let your you are get vaccinated, it will encourage people to get vaccine. Last, I would like to thank the CCI, Dr. Krishna, to give us the to discuss your platform and such an.
Yeah, I think that was excellent one-liner, and I would add by saying stick to the basics and the fundamentals, very important, and build on it. And as Dr. Radha said, you're doing a tremendous job. I know, the family physicians are the, strength of our healthcare system. They have been doing a great job for the last 1 year. Continue to do this. This is not the end of the road. We still have a long way to go. And, follow the rules, follow the guidelines, keep updated regularly. And you should not lag behind, because the dynamics of COVID science is changing. What we are talking today may not be there tomorrow itself. So thank you one and all, the technical, members of this webinar, and everyone who participated. Thank you, and good night, and be safe. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Satish, Dr. Bansal, Dr. Krishna, for just conceptualizing and seeing that it is being done at the right time. Thanks, CCI family. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night, everyone, CCI family. Thank you. Bye.